Okay, it is Sunday the 29th of 2017, and I'm in the middle of my alternative spiritual practice of protesting against Unitarian Universalist injustices, abuses, and hypocrisy outside the Unitarian Church of Montreal, and I just discovered that my camera is no longer recording. I don't know at what point it shut off. It may be that it just overran the half-hour time limit on continual recording, or it could be that it just accidentally shut off for some reason. So I was in a bit of a monologue, a bit of a spiel going on about such despicable crimes as pedophilia and rape committed by certain Unitarian Universalist ministers. And I think probably a fair chunk of it was not recorded, which is a shame, because I wanted it to be recorded. I wanted this video to be up on YouTube and people to have the information available to them. So I think I'm going to rehash, what I said. We're talking about what the Unitarian Universalist Association's Canadian attorney, Maitre Marc-Andre Coulombe of Stikeman Elliott Barristers and Solicitors, describes as such despicable crimes as pedophilia and rape. And we can broaden it out a little bit to other serious sexual misconduct. Let's say, we're not talking about affairs here. We're not talking about sexual harassment. We're going to talk about what could be described as sexual assault. So we're going to throw sexual assault in there. And I'm just going to get my bag for my picket signs. I got blown into the road here. So we're going to stow the picket signs because they keep getting blown down in the wind. So we're just going to walk around with a couple of picket signs. And I think we may wrap this protest up sooner than later today. A fair number of young people showing up today, so there might be some sort of special activity going on. In any case, getting back to such despicable crimes as pedophilia and rape committed by certain Unitarian Universalist ministers and certain Unitarian Universalist Sunday school teachers, to say nothing of certain Unitarian Universalist lay leaders. I was falsely accused of the criminal act of blasphemous libel by Maitre Marc-Andre Coulombe of Stikeman Elliott Barristers and Solicitors for allegedly making unfounded and vicious allegations to the effect that ministers of the association, that is the Unitarian Universalist Association, engage in such despicable crimes as pedophilia and rape. And in another follow-up demand letter, he used the vague term certain Unitarian Universalist ministers. He never named anyone who I had accused of pedophilia and rape on the Emerson Avenger blog. And the interesting thing is that prior to that demand letter, and even following it, I've only spoken about a fairly small number of cases of pedophilia and or rape committed by Unitarian Universalist ministers, and most ironically, the one person who I described as a pedophile rapist, because that's exactly what he was. He was convicted of the forcible rape of preteen children who were no older than 12 years old at the times that the rapes took place, and might have been as young as 6, according to some estimates. This person, Richard Buell of First Parish, Norwell in Massachusetts, the parish of Reverend Dr. Victoria Weinstein, also known as Peace Bang, one of the most obnoxious Unitarian Universalist ministers you're ever going to have the misfortune to run across. Richard Buell, who I did in fact blog about, to the very best of my knowledge, was not even a Unitarian Universalist minister. You know, the one Unitarian Universalist who I did describe as a pedophile rapist, because he was actually convicted of such despicable crimes as pedophilia and rape, specifically the rape of preteen girls who might have been as young as 6 when the rapes first took place, was not even a minister. Now, just because I'd only spoken about one specific pedophile, rapist, Unitarian Universalist doesn't mean to say that there aren't or weren't other pedophile Unitarian Universalists out there, including Unitarian Universalist ministers. In fact, a certain number of Unitarian Universalist ministers who I have actually almost put it this way, I've barely mentioned them so far. I'll get around to it one of these days in some detail, but there's a certain number of Unitarian Universalist ministers out there who have in fact been charged, tried, and convicted of sexual abuse of children, preteen children, and sentenced to jail terms for their pedophilia, child sex abuse. And I'm not talking about Reverend Mac Mitchell here. I'm not using the word pedophile to describe Reverend Mac Mitchell. Reverend Mac Mitchell is probably the most publicly known Unitarian Universalist minister who's actually been charged, tried, and convicted of rape of children. But the children in question were about 16 years old, maybe a little bit younger, possibly 14 or 15 when the rapes first took place, but certainly 16. Rock bottom minimum, we're talking 16 here. In any case, my own definition of pedophilia tends to see pedophilia as sexual abuse of children who are not teenagers, children who are 12 and under. I could be mistaken. I'm not an expert on these things, but I did not describe Reverend Mac Wallace Mitchell as a pedophile rapist, because in my mind he wasn't. He raped children, he raped teenagers who were well below the age of majority. The age of majority in Canada is 18. I think in Massachusetts it's like 20 or 21, something like that. So they were minors. They were minors in pretty much anyone's definition. Now, as it is, from what I understand of Reverend Mac Mitchell's rapes of teenage Tibetan refugees, they were spread over years. So they began when the victims were in their mid-teens, but they actually extended into their late teens and possibly even early 20s. One in particular, one of Reverend Mac Wallace Mitchell's victims, I don't mind naming her, Funtsock. I'll leave off the last name. The last name is actually her married name. She later married a fellow. I'm not going to give the last name, but Funtsock is the most publicly known victim of Reverend Mac Wallace Mitchell. It was Funtsock who was the one who basically reported the rapes. Initially to members of Reverend Mac Wallace Mitchell's congregation. In fact, it is my understanding that it wasn't Funtsock who reported the rapes to the police. My understanding of what happened in the case of Reverend Mac Wallace Mitchell is that Funtsock ran away. Mac Wallace Mitchell had invited Funtsock, and later I think a cousin or cousin, I think, or another relative, and maybe even more than one relative, certainly two minimum, teenage Tibetan refugees, but there might have been one or two others thrown in there for good measure, but certainly a minimum of two. But it was Funtsock who, if I understand correctly, finally ran away and escaped the grip of Reverend Mac Wallace Mitchell when she'd had enough of being repeatedly raped by him in a spread over years. And I think she initially told, some of the congregation members when she finally, came out about the rapes. And what happened is there was an attempt to have Funtsock and probably the other victim sign confidentiality agreements. There's a newspaper article about this that's not available on the internet, where it speaks about how sometime after Funtsock initially reported the rapes to congregants of Reverend Mac Wallace Mitchell congregation, Northborough and Westborough in Massachusetts. He actually had two congregations. That there was an attempt made, and it's not clear from the newspaper article if it was by the congregation or if it was by the Unitarian Universalist Association or a combination of both. But my own reasonable guesswork or reasonable conjecture, speculation based on what I know about how the Unitarian Universalist Association operates or has operated in these matters, is that it almost certainly was involved, that it was almost certainly not just the congregation that was trying to get Funtsock and the other victim or victims to sign confidentiality agreements. And it may be that the congregation itself wasn't involved at all. But certainly, it's credible newspaper reports about how there was an attempt to have Funtsock and at least one other victim sign confidentiality agreements, which would have silenced them. But what happened is that I think 5 of the congregants, I think they're all women, that Funtsock reported the rapes to, decided that the best thing to do was to report what they knew to the police, and that's what they did. They did the right thing. They did what any decent human being would do in a situation where you're being told that your minister has repeatedly raped someone over a period measured in years. Someone who was given into his care under false pretenses. So these 5 members of Reverend Mac Wallace Mitchell's congregation, went to the police and reported to the police the allegations of rape, and so that began an investigation. And Reverend Mac Wallace Mitchell was arrested, and he was charged, and he was tried, and he was convicted, and he was sent to jail for the despicable crime of rape of teenage Tibetan refugees. Only because these 5 female, to the best of my knowledge, all of them, members of his congregation did the right thing and went to the police. Now, the interesting thing is that as a result of doing the right thing, these 5 women were shunned and ostracized and otherwise mistreated by the other members of their congregation. Now, I'm not saying all the other members of their congregation, but essentially, and this happens quite frequently, is the people who do the right thing in the case of clergy sexual misconduct or alleged clergy sexual misconduct and report it either to the police or to the church authorities, and I'm not limiting this to the Unitarian Church at all, they are shunned and ostracized and otherwise mistreated by a good number of their fellow congregants and co-religionists and so on. So that's what happened in the case of Mac Mitchell. And I just want to underline again that from my perspective, I don't think of Reverend Mac Mitchell as a specifically pedophile rapist. That's reserved for Richard Buell, Stephen Craig Bullite, and other pedophile Unitarian Universalists, Unitarian Universalist ministers, Unitarian Universalist Sunday school teachers who have sexually abused preteen children. That's my definition of a pedophile, is someone who is sexually attracted to and seeks sexual, gratification with preteen children. Maybe you could throw 13 or 14 in there, but there's a cutoff point. I don't know what the cutoff point is. Maybe there's some legal definition of what a pedophile is, but it's,